mulligans for him and his opponent just not finding Spiteful Summoner. But he knows these are his out, so he will be mulliganing very aggressively for the best possible hands, I would say, as we already jump into game number 1. And for Firebat here, starting off with the Tempo Mage, which is probably actually going to be struggling quite heavily against this Paladin, has a pretty respectable start to get things going, though.
Yeah, and this Paladin, I really want to talk about it from Kranich because it is not your usual aggro Paladin. It's got the Murloc package as well as Spiteful Summoner and Dino Size, which is a card I have honestly never seen in a competitive format yet.
Yeah, I think Zixo was going with a similar strategy at Seat Story Cup, but the kind of downside with this deck is that, well, it's not really a downside, is that Call to Arms is so good that you have to run it in order to play an aggressive Murloc Paladin deck now, which really dilutes the power of Spiteful Summoner here for Kranich. But even so, just that power swing on turn 6, no matter what spell you pull, is very powerful indeed.
And already the turn for Firebat is looking awkward. Normally you'd love to go Kirin Tor and Secret. It's a lot of value for the amount of mana you're spending, but it's going to die straight up to an amazing trade up from the Hydrologist.
Exactly, and even in addition to that, if he goes for the counter spell, usually that would be fantastic against Paladin, because if you're denying Call to Arms, which is one of the only spells in the deck, you're feeling great, but denying a secret from the Hydrologist is way less impactful.
And Kranich knows this for sure, and despite not being sure of what secret that Firebat would play, having Redemption with Argent Protector is also just really insane. Such a pain for the mage to deal with. And look at this Explosive Runes dealing with nothing but a Divine Shield.
This is just perfect for Kranich, because obviously there's a bit of a dance you have to play around with Explosive Runes, where the smaller minion you play, the more damage you take. But in this particular game, it's really just about board control. Kranich doesn't care about his health total too much quite yet, because as long as he locks down the early board control, he will probably be able to kill his opponent before enough burst damage can come down to kill him off.
Right, and it's looking like it's just going to be a 4-mana Purple Worm for Firebat here. Not the best you can get with it, but I just don't see anything else that is worth doing. Pinging plus playing a Tempo Valet seems awful. Guess you could set up a secret, but again, it's really, really passive, and this deck from Kranich can get out of hand extremely quickly, and because I believe it also runs Divine Favors, the more cards you keep in hand, the bigger a punish it could lead to.
That's a very good point. I can agree with the Corridor Creeper. A 4-mana 5/5, I am very often too greedy with Creeper because I'm thinking, oh, next turn it'll cost 0 mana. Why would I play it now? But just looking at this versus the Valet, it's just so much stronger onto the board by playing the Creeper here. And next turn, there's also the upside, as you said, of playing a secret with the Valet, starting to wrestle back board. And now for Firebat, because he's got that Alunith in hand, if he can just stay even on board for the next few turns so he has the ability to play the Alunith without just dying, then he's actually looking to be in a decent spot potentially to start pushing some damage.
Right, so just a small correction to make. Kranich is actually not running Divine Favors, and the spot, I believe, was taken up by Aldor Peacekeeper, which is not something you would think to automatically include in an aggressive style deck. It's more often a staple of control-oriented paladins, but I think the thinking here is that, well, it's done some great work against Corridor Creepers. Maybe in this meta that tends to drop a lot of mid-range minions early.
It's a good point.
Aldor is a very, very easy way to neutralize that threat while still maintaining minions on board.
That's true, and obviously the anti-synergy with Spiteful Summoner, because who would put 3-mana spells in a deck with Spiteful Summoner?
True. You can go for 4 mana though, because Call to Arms is just that good.
Yeah, indeed. Now, having to activate the secret here, it's kind of bad for Firebat because, as you said, obviously it's really powerful synergy between the Protector and the Redemption. But getting this out of the way so we can play the counter spell to try and deny a Call to Arms later on is actually quite a big deal.
Right, Firebat actually had the option to ping away the Recruit to get the Redemption on that, but he deems it too slow onto the board. He'd really like to get that Valet activated, and I agree with this play for sure.
Yeah, he needs to start dumping his hand so that he can play a Lunith and draw back up to crazy amounts of cards.
Kranich not too bothered by tossing away a War Leader. His curve going into the next few turns looks pretty insane, if I do say so myself.
It does indeed, but there's a window here, I suppose, for Firebat to clear off whatever he can, because he really wants to do that on this turn and on the next turn too, because if he leaves this up, Harem comes down, which is really quite bad for him. And if he leaves it up for the next turn, then Bone Mare, and then even Dino Size as well, I suppose. He really needs to keep the board completely clear for the next few turns, but he just doesn't have the ability to do so.
Right, as we saw yesterday, so many times the Mage deck just does not have the tools to go wide. It can deal with tall minions, but the most Firebat can clear here is, what, 2 minions, and it involves pinging and using a Fireball, which seems absolutely awful. So obviously, Alaneth is going to be the play here, but this Tarim will definitely lock Firebat out of this game, despite all the card draw.
Yeah. Flamemaker would be pretty good in this deck, wouldn't it?
Ooh, back in 2014, like when these two fought at BlizzCon?
I'd probably play that. And yeah, as you said, the Tarim here, Firebat was telling us earlier today as well, Tarim is like the best card you can play in this Paladin deck, and when you're playing it, you should basically win the turn you play it or the turn after, and this is what Kranich is setting up to do. Lethal on board, super lethal when the Bone Mare comes down, so Firebat has to clear up way more stuff than he has even the ability to do so here.
So I find it really interesting that Kranich decided to go for all face with that play, because he's really looking to go for Bone Mare. We know that there's no natural AoE in Firebat's deck, but I feel like the one way Kranich could have lost from that position was a glyph into Flame Strike or something like that.
Okay.
So I wonder if Kranich just doesn't consider it worth losing the 3 damage, something so unlikely. I can definitely understand that, but if he were to somehow lose a Bone Mare target, I wonder how that would have ruined his game plan.
I guess he's thinking there's a chance for Glyph into Flame Strike, but the chance of double Frostbolt or Fireball or Valet or going for Glyph into Frostbolts to clear off these minions to deny lethal is probably a slightly higher chance.
Sure.
So getting all the damage into face is very valuable.
So Kranich now can put Firebat at a meager 2 health with the Bone Mare, and I think that's the only play here. Despite an ice block, the game will be ending very, very quickly.
Well, let's take a look at the amount of damage that Firebat can push forward, because he can go 5 here to face, which is 17 he can bring his opponent down to, and then 12 with the 2 fireballs, so he's still not there.
Yeah, he absolutely has to play Ice Block this turn. So 1 Fireball going to face would only put Kranich at 16, which is out of range of anything Firebat could generate. So we could, again, talk about that fantasy world where Glyph into Tome into blah, blah, blah will happen. But in 99.9999999 and so on % of the time, Kranich has this in the bag. And my only regret is that we might not get to see Dino Size in action.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty fitting way to close out the game, even if it's completely unnecessary.
Right. So does Firebat have any insane Firelands pulls that can get him out of this? Even Doomguard is not quite enough. He has to go for the block this turn.
He does indeed. The real high rolls are things like Earth Elemental, Doomguard, Leroy, things like that can maybe put you in a position to just stall for 1 extra turn, but it's really not available for Firebat at the moment. If he had 2 ice blocks in his deck, maybe he could start going for the Super Freeze Magey plan. But I think he's realised this is a 0.001% game, and I just need to take those odds.
Right, so Kranich here should be very aware of the first priority of things, which is popping the block. And once he sees that, I haven't won yet, it's just going to be a simple matter of removing minions, and he's free to develop a Bone Mare again. I wonder if there's any Spiteful Summoner pull that actually works negatively.
Yeah, with the 4-mana pull, it's something like Ticking Abominations, something like that might blow up his own board, but even then it's very limited stuff that could do it, especially as both Frostbolts have been played, so there's no way to even freeze the weapon from Kranich to deny lethal from Firebat.
Right, and because of that, there's absolutely no risk, no reason to take the risk with Spiteful Summoner. So just making a 10-10 Silverhand Recruit, we did get to see it. I'm so happy.
Hey, there we go.
Not that it's doing very much, aside from asserting dominance.
Yeah, exactly. He's staring down a dinosaur-sized minion.
That'd be a great narrative, right? The lowly Silverhand Recruit making it to turn 8 and getting up to a 10-10 stat line. So is this going to be some sort of Quest Mage transformation for Firebat here? A mini Quest Mage turn? Not quite going to cut it.
Yeah, no, this does not do it. He can play the secret for bluff value, but yeah, this is over for Firebat. And this is kind of the situation he knew he'd end up in, because this Tempo Mage, while it is one of the most aggressive decks in the format at the moment, it does just struggle against other aggressive decks, because its ability to lock down the board early on relies so heavily on Mana Worm. And when you don't get that, you just fall behind on board against Rogue, against Paladin, even against Hunter. It just can't quite get the job done.
Yeah, I really don't see any way for even an Earth Elemental for this to work, even in tandem with the Ice Barrier. Maybe from Firebat's perspective, he could have survived with some kind of big taunt, but Kranich has the second Dino Size and Bone Mare and every sort of answer, so Firebat gonna give it up, and no surprise at all, Kranich taking a win with his aggressive lineup.
Now left for Kranich is only the Hunter and the Rogue, which, to be honest, function fairly similarly to the Paladin. They both go for this very aggressive tempo plan early on, curve out into things like Corridor Creeper, Bone Mare, things like that to lock down the mid game. And for Firebat, he's going to have to get a very impressive start with his Tempo Mage with all the crazy secret reduction and Mana Worm nonsense that can occur, or something equally ridiculous with his Druid. It's going to have to be very, very impressive play and draws from Firebat to pull this back.
Right, and if you're Kranich and thinking maybe Firebat wants to queue back the Mage, both of his decks have a decent chance against it, I gotta say. And even so, it's not like the Mage is Firebat's worst deck in this lineup at all. He still got to win with a very slow Jade Druid, which only had Spreading Plagues to deal with these kind of aggressive lineups. So I honestly don't know what's going through Firebat's head right now.
Yeah, I guess he's kind of wishing that this was last year of Standing so he could just go all in with his Priest deck, which I know he thinks very highly of, very proficient with it, but he can only be taking one victory with that, and that is his real trump card left in his lineup. As for the rest of it, he's going to have to be playing at the absolute top of his game and hoping that Kranich is making some serious mistakes, but from Kranich so far, we haven't really been seeing that.
Yeah, no, Kranich is not a player who is known for making sloppy play. We did see at the BlizzCon Invitational recently, he basically carried 5 games in a row, all on his own against 3 different players. So this is not a guy who cracks under pressure.
Yeah.
At the same time, Firebat, years and years of experience at the player stage, behind the caster desk, and everywhere. We know that this is someone who prides himself on analysis. And so if there's going to be any way to find a way out of this tricky situation, we know that Firebat's the guy to find it.
He absolutely is. We know he was coming into this with a very level-headed approach. He just, this morning, he was like, right, I'm like about 20% to win this. I'll give it a shot anyway. Try my absolute best. But he knows that it's, you know, he's not hoping unrealistically that he can win it. He's just going to give it his best shot. And keeping the Aluneth on the play against Rogue feels kind of slow, but I guess indicating already the kind of aggressive burn game plan he's going for.
Yeah, I'm sure Firebat has this matchup very well understood and studied, and having drawn Aluneth this game, I feel like it's more relevant than it would have been last game against a Paladin, which really just doesn't give you enough time to burn them out. But perhaps this Rogue, if it gets kind of a slower start like this without Pirates, of course Keleseth is an amazing turn too, but it looks like from Kranich, if he top decks things that are not playable yet, the turns will be Dagger into SI7 Agent, which is not what the Rogue really wants to be doing, and maybe that gives Firebat the window to try and take the board. It's
true, but at the same time, Kranich has a really good chance of finding some of those all-important cards to play a little bit earlier. And I was going to say, some of the spells aren't that good, like Backstab, but Shadow Step here is probably just one of the best cards he could get, because now any minion he draws from this point on is absurdly powerful.
Yeah, and I think I really like this hold from Kranich here because it gives him a combo activator for the SI7 Agent next turn, so he's able to answer basically any minion that Mage plays on turn 3 between the SI combo and the Dagger charge, because Mage minion stat lines are usually 3 health Mana Worm, Kirin Mage, Arcanologist, and so on. So very, very non-greedy and logical play from that.
Yes, I would have to agree. And for Firebat, he, you know, with holding back the Keleseth there, he's either thinking, right, he's got an SI7 or an Edwin in hand, and either way, it's terrible for him. So he just has to play out the Mana Worm and say, I hope he hasn't got SI, even though that does obviously come down here. And while the follow-up for Kranich isn't too strong quite yet, you definitely don't want to be playing the Elven Minstrel. There's so many fantastic draws to put him in a good spot.
And we always talk about the possible way for Mage to be bailed out of its unfavorables, and that is Primordial Glyph and the infinite value of Glyph into Tome into Glyph into Tome and so on. So maybe Firebat can find some sort of large AoE. A Flame Strike is incredibly effective against Rogue to reset the board, but with this kind of start, I don't think he will have that much time. However, all these other choice. Well, Mirror Entity does have synergy with Kirin Tormage, so I guess it's only a pick between those two.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has synergy, but at the same time, you're then only getting a 1 mana reduction. Going for the Tome, it's perhaps a little bit too much of a risk. But yeah, maybe you can get something like Blizzard or Flame Strike, but with a double Keleseth buff, is anything even really dying to it? Everything's just going to be too high health.
Right, and he actually even takes the one that I did not consider, the Greater Arcane Missiles, and I think this is very indicative of his game plan, which is probably freeze the board and go face, because I don't think you can reliably expect Greater Arcane Missiles to deal with the board. However, this is looking like the board to do it, if ever.
Yeah, this is looking fantastic for Firebat. This is kind of functioning as his Flame Strike, not clearing off all the minions, but doing a pretty good job to get the majority off the board anyway.
Yeah, and it's quite fortunate, I'd say, that Kranich was not able to play a minion that had over 3 health, which I guess you could expect from a Keleseth Shadowstep
Definitely.
Deck. But that did work out. Great foresight from Firebat there. And this turn is pretty good.
Yeah, this is ridiculous for Kranich. All of a sudden, Firebat is so far on the defensive. Last turn, he was looking all right. But now with 7 damage of charges and a 5/5, all for 5 mana, with the follow-up of Leroy Jenkins for 7 attack on the following turn is just so beyond any level of reasonability. So Firebat has to just start firing off his burn to minions. He can't even go for a Luneth because he's so far behind. And these are just not the games that Mage wins.
No, not at all. In between the Leroy and all these minions and the dagger, I think that Kranich is only 1 off.
Wow.
But no reason not to go for it, sure.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The mage at a range where only your dagger is enough to pop a block.
Yeah, and so then it has to be yet another Frostbolt, of which we've already seen one, I believe.
And a block in the first place. We don't even see it there.
Right,
so.
sure, yeah. And so that is going to be... Oh, well, you can go for Arcanologist into Ice Block just to try and buy him a turn.
Sure. I think, though, that if you're Firebat, the game-winning play is to roll an Earth Elemental off of the Firelands portal.
A bit more optimistic.
Yeah. The thing is, Arcanologist will more likely buy you 1 more turn, but I feel like it's completely not gonna win you the game at some point.
And so at this point, when Kranich has effectively won the game already, there was one play that I wanted to ask you about that was kind of interesting that he could have considered, which was on turn 3 not playing the cheap 0 mana Keleseth with the SI7 agent, but instead saving it for the Elven Minstrel the turn after. Could have potentially drawn a couple of extra cards and been a little bit greedier, or do you like this more tempo-heavy approach from Kranich?
I believe that would have left a Mana Worm on board,
It would have done.
So
Is it too much of a risk?
Yeah, I would not like to see that. If you're Kranich, I think you're so far ahead that you don't mind using... giving up the Elven Minstrel draw just to make sure that the mage has no early game and way to kind of get out of hand with, say, discovering Frost Novas and things like that and hitting you in the face with the Mana Worm forever and ever.
And I guess if you're winning on turn 6 or 7, it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 5 cards in hand. As long as you have enough stuff to get you there, you should be just fine.
Great, so Firebat has managed to survive thus far, but Kranich bouncing the patches just to have an activator for Vilespine, I suppose, because he doesn't really want to use Edwin as an activator. Also, it gives him a way to play around a board and face freeze.
That's right. I think that's the main thing, is that if Frostbolt comes down and there's a Frost Nova off Glyph, something like that, he has lethal no matter what. There is simply nothing that Firebat can do here.
Right, so if Firebat rolls Earth Elemental, and it's still not going to be enough.
No, it doesn't do it.
Yeah. Because he's not able to get rid of the 7/7 Bone Mare very cleanly at all.
Yeah, Knuckles, sadly, today is not his day, and for Kranich, he now only has to get 1 victory with his Hunter deck, which again functions very similarly to all the other decks. You just play all the good class early game cards, like the Alley Cat, and I guess Diamole is almost like a class card for Hunter, excluding Aggro Druid, and then you follow up with the power turns of Spiteful Summoner.
Yeah, Diamole has made an appearance in Aggro Shaman, which people don't really believe
true?
is a deck, but I've seen some people playing it on High Legend Ladder. Anyway, there is no Shaman in this tournament, so no reason to be talking about that, but this series is pretty much playing out the way all of us expected. Casters, Firebat himself definitely knew that he was very much unfavored to get a win in this matchup. So now the Hunter, at some point, it's really bound to find a win. At some point, you're going to draw Spiteful Summoner without having drawn both Call of the Wild, and oftentimes that's enough to lock away a game.
Yeah. And I think for Firebat here, while he does have one fairly respectable matchup in the Priest, bringing this into the Hunter, I think he'll probably be starting off with one of his two worst matchups with the Druid and the Mage, because of the fact that he just knows, well, if I can't win this, I can't win the series, so I may as well just not waste everyone's time.
Yeah, absolutely. This series has been going fast and furious, and we don't know Firebat to be a person who would like to milk his camera time, because he is very much well known to everybody in this esports arena, to everyone watching, I assume. So I'd expect him to just probably stick with the Mage, because it's what he's been doing so far, and it's not like any matchup order matters at this point where you have to win with all three decks.
Exactly. He really is a fan favorite here at the tournament, isn't he? With the signings, all the audience members who come along can come and get an autograph with the players afterwards, and he's just so smooth, so cool, very cash with all the fans. Very cash.
All right, some new British slang for me today. Every day, learning something new. And yeah, Lorinda did mention that Firebat was the guy that was carrying on a conversation with everybody at the meet and greet who tried to just get his autograph. Like, Firebat would go out of his way to ask what they thought of the event and so on. And that really shows how much he likes this kind of friendly community.
Yeah. And now for Firebat, getting a somewhat more respectable hand, one might say, keeping the Aluneth again, and because he's found Mana Worm and Glyph, it's looking like there's a good chance he'll be even at least, or maybe ahead on board, heading into turn 6, so we can start keeping up with the burn plan.
Right, and the order of what player goes first here is absolutely crucial, I think, because if the hands were reversed and Firebat were able to play Mana Worm on 1, then Kranich would be forced to react with Candle Shot, just an equip probably, and then that would slow down his whole game plan. The only way to get rid of it on that turn would be to coin out the deck hand, which feels awful. So this way around, Kranich is the one who's forcing a reaction from Firebat.
It's true. Kranich has definitely gained the advantage on turns like 1 or 2, but maybe as we head into the mid stages of the game, Firebat can get an Aluneth out a turn early. Maybe be the first player to get a Corridor Creeper on board and start to pull ahead in those stages of the game with more reactive play. Right,
the Corridor Creeper is the name of the game here, because
may as well be.
Now that Kranich has picked up an Alley Cut, which not only is providing him an target for the Razor Maw in 3, which otherwise would have been a really weak turn. It's more targets for these Corridor Creeper. Well, basically, I imagine this worm just feeding on those cats to be cheaper.
Not the cute cat, please.
All right, just the purple one then.
Okay, good. And as for the adaptations here, Poisonous plus attack. Yeah, all these ones are perfectly fine just to keep board control, because he could go nice and aggressive here, but keeping the Crackling Razor Maw on the board is probably a bit more valuable than trading in a 1-1.
Right, and Kranich actually going for a weapon attack here, which I'm not sure I agree with without having another weapon in hand. I guess he thinks that with this kind of board state, having that extra 1 damage, it's not really necessary with these minions, but Firebat will be able to play Corridor Creeper this turn. Kirintor plus Explosive Runes. Do you like this better, even though the Razor Maw trades up pretty neatly?
It does, but at the same time then, you're clearing off your opponent's board. They're left with only 2 1/1s, and they're unlikely to play more than 1 minion, given how they've been playing on the previous turns. Well, I guess they've been filling out most of their mana, but they clearly don't have too many 1-drops left in hand, I should say. So you can blow up whatever comes out with the Explosive Runes, and then take out the Razor Maw with your Kirintor Mage itself. So you should be left with a fairly clear board on the following turn to maybe go for something like Glyph into Corridor Creeper. Right,
it definitely made room for a more explosive turn, and I'm really interested in Kranich's choice of adapt target there, because I'm thinking that it's pretty clear that the Razor Maw will be trading into the Kirintor Mage, because again, you'd rather have a wide board against as opposed to just 1 minion. So I might have actually wanted to see an adapt onto the uncute cat, because it's sure to survive.
Ah, okay, fair enough. But I guess at the same time, he was probably looking most of all for for Divine Shield, maybe plus health. And even as a consolation prize, just 3 damage to face could come in handy quite in a large way.
So looking like Crystal Runner is going to be accompanying the Purple Worm here. Are you liking Glyph and Ping? I guess it denies a beast target for Houndmaster if you ping away the cute cat.
So clearly indicating with this line of play, though, going for the Crystal Runner, with the Ice Block, showing he doesn't want to go for Aluneth too early. He wants to make sure he's locked down board control first. which kind of makes sense because it's just a classic facet of Hearthstone play is that you play your cards before you want to draw more cards because you want to keep up the tempo early on to make sure you've solidified your board control. So clearly want to be playing whatever he gets off the top or whatever he gets off the glyph and then following up with the Alunith.
Right, I think that was the one window Firebat had to take back the board control, so I really like playing both of the 5/5s out. And now that Patches is looking like ping bait, but...
that Cobalt's looking like fireball bait.
Yeah. If only we had one more mana, huh?
Wouldn't that be nice?
So using the Fireball here allows him to take 2 value trades, although I'm not sure the 5/5 into 4/1 is much of a value trade at all because Candle Shot can take it out for free. So Firebat looking like he's going to go for a ping, and that means the turn starts with Glyph.
So with Forbidden Flame, we could even see just taking out the Alley Cat. It's a very low value play, so I don't expect to see that in the end.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to be Polymorph, huh? As you're expecting.
Deal with the summoner?
Yeah, whatever it summons on the next turn. But that is a super slow play. Can Firebat really expect to just be dealing with the Hunter's threats 1-1? I think it's possible because he has Alunith, but the thing is he's at such a low health total that Kranich can just start weaving in those Hunter hero powers every turn. Might not be enough time, so Firebat decides he needs something better, and Dragon's Fury, I guess, into Fireland Portal would be interesting. So it looks like he's going for exactly that, and that's why he goes face first.
So the amount of cards he has left, he's got a couple of secrets. Obviously the Firelands Portal is the main thing. Not going for it quite yet, as he clearly indicates he's going for the pure burn plan. And with the Ice Block in play, this kind of makes sense, to be honest.
Sure, yeah, I can definitely see it. And 9 drops vary wildly, but I think Obsidian Statue is the best here. Hadronoc's not quite it. I don't think Kranich has played any taunt minions to revive, so Kranich might be the one forced to trade here, and even so, that will leave at least 1 minion.
I'm not really sure how he can afford to not trade unless he thinks this is Counterspell instead of the Ice Block, and he realizes it very possibly could be an Ice Block, in which case I'm just not going to be winning this game.
Right. So the interesting thing is that I think Hadronox is actually a beast, so even if the Algae Cat gets pinged, Kranich has a Houndmaster target.
That's a fair point.
So, Firebat's burn, of course, is only Fireball, as we can see right now. Explosive Runes could provide maybe another 3 burn if we see Houndmaster come down. But that taunt could be very relevant because it means Kranich might not have to pay attention to the Crystal Runner. Instead, with his wall, just go for face and give Firebat a clock to deal with as well.
I mean, from this point on, both players are just ignoring board control, I think, really, because it's the taunt that's protecting Kranich and the Ice Block that's protecting Firebat. It's just about how much damage you can push forward to your opponent's face as quickly as possible, which for Kranich comes through his minions and for Firebat comes through his burn spells. And because of that, does he equip the Luneth now and give up a turn of burn? Or does he just go for the Fireball and pray that he top decks some source of damage?
Yeah, I think you need to think about the mana cut-offs, right? So if you go for a Luneth this turn and expect your block to get popped, you still won't have enough mana to go for double Fireball. So I think this line of play makes more sense from Firebat, trying and stall the board a little bit where he can fit in enough pings that he'll have enough mana to go for one solid turn of burning Kranich to the ground.
And here for Kranich, it's so many difficult plays because if he's expecting this to be the Explosive Runes, which is a very valid assumption, he wants to be playing the Tundra Rhino probably because he doesn't want to take any more damage. But all of a sudden then he doesn't have Taunt on any of his beasts, so he has to start killing off this Kirin Tor Mage, which means he's only pushing, 3 damage to face, which is just not a game-winning play. And maybe because of that, he just needs to assume there's no burn in hand, because if there is, I'm losing this game anyway.
But I don't think it's a safe assumption. Kranich realizes that, so he puts himself out of range of something as simple as Fireball Ping, which is, you can definitely put Firebat on having that, especially having seen the way he's played so far. Of course, I definitely see your point in that now he gives Firebat essentially 1 or 2 more turns to draw into additional burn.
So now for Firebat, it's only a Medivh Valet, a Frostbolt to close this game out, and that is going to be it. So he's putting his first win on the board with this Tempo Mage, and this is a fantastic deck to be getting a win with. He's still leaving his Priest in play, which I think gives him the best chance of taking this matchup. And in order to put himself in a really good spot, he just needs to be winning with that Druid.
Right. Very, very clean play from Firebat there. I think he saw the way he wins this game pretty early on.
Absolutely.
And although Kranich had the early board, the huge swing turn of, I think, Corridor Creeper plus Cabal Crystal Runner was really what gave Firebat the leverage to start going for the burn game plan. And I think it all ties back to him holding onto the Corridor Creeper and instead playing Kirin Mage because he realized that he needed that one swing turn.
Yep, he did indeed. And I think maybe Firebat will be reconsidering potentially about his keeps of Aluneth in those games, because in all 3 of those games that he played with the Temper Mage, Aluneth didn't really come in that big in any of them. And I suppose in all of them he either drew so badly that he was never winning anyway, or he drew so well that he didn't need the extra cards in order to be closing out the game. But maybe just going for a slightly more aggressive line of play, trying to get more burn quickly, could have closed out that game even quicker.
Did he keep Aluneth in this game? I know he kept it in the last 2.
He did.
So all 3?
Yes,
all right. So yeah, maybe it would be worth reconsidering in a next series if he's able to make it that far. But given that Firebat queued what we think is a deck that would struggle more than Priest, I expect him to queue up the Druid next. And what do you think the story is for the Hunter versus Druid matchup? I
mean, for the Hunter versus Druid, it's basically just the same as against the Paladin, where Spiteful Summoner is really, really, really good against Druid. So if he was going to go for the Druid, he would have to get the perfect start with all the ramp. But given that this is the Priest, it's a slightly different game plan. And taking a look at his Priest deck, it seems to be just fairly standard. Nothing too anti-aggro, nothing too anti-control. There's some cards that work in his favor. Maybe Dirty Rat able to pull out that Spiteful Summoner before it can get the Battle Cry. But other than that, it's nothing too out of the ordinary. Just standard Kazakus Priest gameplay for Firebat.
Right, and this is looking like an anti-Priest hand if I've ever seen one from Kranich. And even picking up the 1-drop to consolidate that curve. I was thinking that even being able to play Bear Shark on 2 is really strong. But now this looks like a 1-2-3, possibly Eagle Horn Bow on 4 into coin Spiteful Summoner hand. If it doesn't get pulled out, but
that is the worst option for Firebat.
Awful, and it even gives Kranich a better target for the Crackling Brazier Maul.
Absolutely.
So not what Firebat wanted to see there, but I think he recognized that with this kind of Hunter deck that runs Pirates and Alley Cats, he had a decent amount of good pulls with the Dirty Rat, even Spiteful Summoner, even though it would be something to deal with on board. At least it's a nuisance out of the way later.
Right, that's a good point. I mean, I was thinking when he went for that play, he's assuming he's so far behind that he has to get insanely lucky to win this game. But it's less about that. I think you're spot on in saying he's just so likely to pull something rubbish like a Pirate Patches or the Spiteful Summoner itself as the really nice one, that it's not really anything to be afraid of.
So Kranich actually choosing to buff up the Dire Maul. I guess he was hunting for Poisonous there. I find it kind of interesting because if you put Poisonous onto a 1-3, it makes it a Potion of Madness primetime target. Whereas if you adapt the Bear Shark, attack, Poisonous, and I guess
Wind
just
Fury, Divine Shield,
+1/+1 even with the Dire Maul might have been better. Then again, I guess it works the other way around if you put the +1/+1 on the Dire Maul. But
I think I preferred it on the Bear Shark because no matter how big you make the Bear Shark, it's only dying to AoE.
Right. So this turn from Kranich is looking like trade the Bear Shark and Molin and then use the weapon to get rid of Acolyte, and then he only needs to draw one more thing to do, and then we get to coin out Spiteful into Spiteful. And if the second Call of the Wild isn't drawn, this could get out of hand really, really quickly. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. He needs to draw something to do, and he needs to really, really, really not draw that second Call of the Wild. He just needs to really just not. If you could just not do that, Kranich, that would be absolutely primo, because that would just destroy any kind of chance he has of pulling ahead in the mid-game. Obviously, if the Priest has a slow mid-game itself, the Call of the Wilds themselves could be good enough in the later stages of the game. But at the moment, Kranich is definitely hoping to get Spiteful Summoner into Summoner.
Right, and I feel like every draw for Kranich from this turn and the next is absolutely nerve-wracking.
I know.
Because it could ruin the whole thing. It is like the feeling before playing a Pirate and drawing Patches right when you're about to play it times a million. Because
you don't know it's going to be Patches, but you know it's going to be Patches.
Yes. And speaking of which, Kranich was able to pull something to do for this turn, which is very convenient for clearing off that Priest of the Feast. He maintains board control while having pretty much the strongest plays in his deck for the next 2 turns. Whereas Firebat, nothing he really wants to do here. I guess cycling is the only option.
Yeah, now that he's got Shadow Visions, he has the option to start looking for some specific card. So what's he really looking for at this point in the game?
In terms of spells, I feel like he's got two of the best already, Dragonfire Potion and Psychic Scream. Maybe, I don't know, a silence effect if something weird comes out of a Spiteful Summoner, but I don't really like it too much.
Something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Power Word Shield seems like a great way to buff up his board, though, and just keep cycling through, because he needs to be finding... Anduin is pretty important to have found over the next few turns, because now he's actually got a pretty respectable game plan, because he just survives the two Spiteful Summoners through a combination of Potion and Psychic Scream, and then plays Anduin.
No, this is insane. This is the Priest dream where you curve AoE into AoE into AoE, and I feel like this is the exact hand he would have needed to deal with a Spiteful Summoner board. So, first of all, the most important thing is whether this minion will have more than 5 health to survive Dragonfire Potion. So, what's it going to be?
That'll do it.
Blood of the Ancient One, sure.
That's not bad at all. Can't be... Well, silence doesn't do anything on it unless a second Blood of the Ancient One. Well, even then, it would still summon it if the first one was silence. But anyway, that is still a very respectable 9/9 body to get things going, which means because the Radiant Elemental was killed off so effectively by Kranich, Psychic Scream cannot come down on this turn, which is a very big difference.
It was an absolutely necessary trade from Kranich there, and now Firebat, I still think he is forced to go for the Dragonfire Potion, but that means he will be taking 9 to face, and, well, if the Spiteful Summoner pulls a charge minion, then it could get out of hand really quickly. However, if it pulls, actually basically anything, dies, quote unquote, to Psychic Scream, right? Because it negates Death Rattle effects.
Exactly.
So this might be the window. At 12, it's actually not too scary of a health total to be at against Hunter, especially when they're not able to fit in pings. So I'm thinking that Firebat's actually in an alright spot.
He's looking pretty good here, considering as long as Kranich isn't a King Crush gamer, I think Firebat should be in a decent spot to curve into Anduin. And then as soon as he finds Raza, he should have enough stuff to pour into the Priest machine gun to kill off all of the Hunter minions.
Right. I think the name of the game here is what happens post Anduin. So if Firebat's able to find the Raza, as you said, he'll be in a really great spot. But at the same time, if he doesn't, Kranich is able to play the natural Call of the Wild. And that board essentially has no more clean answers because Dragonfire Potion and Anduin would have been used by then. But Kranich actually going to play around Psychic Scream here, which is really interesting. How do you like this?
This is the one card he's playing around in Psychic Scream, and I think I like it because obviously we can see he's not playing around Scream and Anduin, but those two cards are so good against whatever he does that he can't really afford to play around both of them. So just playing around the Scream as effectively as possible, I actually like it quite a lot.
Yeah, I love that play, especially since playing Spiteful Summoner into turn 8 provides the best attack minion to survive an Anduin anyway.
Yeah, Osric, I suppose, given that Anduin is almost certainly going to come down, it doesn't really make any difference what it was if it's above 5 attack.
You would have loved to get a Ysera there, huh?
You would love a Ysera.
Or a
Sleepy
Malygos.
Dragon, Malygos.
You take those, You don't complain if you get your 4 attack minion to survive. But anyway, Firebat here, I think he's still forced to go for the Anduin as everything else. Well, Death can clear it as well, but it's not like he particularly wants to fit anything else into this turn.
I mean, Binding Heal, he could just throw down one of the enemy minions just for 5 extra health.
Sure, but Anduin does that too, right?
Yeah, and there's no kill command. There's not even a beast in play to activate kill command in this deck.
Alternatively, he could dig with Mass Dispel to find something and then play the Death, but he's putting himself essentially at 2 health. So if the Hunter has 2 damage, then it could get out of hand. So I think Anduin makes the most sense here.
I agree, but I love that Firebat's taking it a little bit slower here because there are benefits to the other plays if you're really afraid of some kind of burst. But I think he's correctly realised that the amount of burst is actually fairly limited in this deck for a Hunter.
So Kranich couldn't have really hoped to pick up something insane there because the mid-game best plays have been used already. Houndmaster is definitely a respectable stat line to deal with, though, for Firebat. So,
Auchenai Soul Priest?
Now? Yeah, Auchenai or Kazaka's into a good potion, but even then he would have to deal with Call of the Wild.
Yeah, I think it's just machine gunning your hero powers in combination with Binding Heal. You can go Hero Power, Binding Heal, Hero Power for 5, and then Hero Power Circle, Hero Power for 9, or Hero Power Mind Blast.
Yeah, you couldn't have fit in 4 hero powers, I think, with the...
Yeah, just about 4 hero powers. But then he needs to be careful, because if he's attacking a minion and then going for Circle of Healing, then it heals it back up, so he can't even kill it off.
Right, and you have to binding heal the 1 health minion, for sure.
Yes, exactly. Very good point. So clearly he's thinking that's not a winning game plan, going for the Master Spell, but I disagree with that. Yeah, I think going for this right now is good enough at the moment. The Binding Heal heals you up.
Yeah.
And you can then dig for stuff on the next turn, because the amount of pressure you're facing is probably not going to be that high. But actually, having said that, I think he probably assumes that this is Call of the Wild.
Yeah, but then again, if it isn't, and I think for Firebat, he needs to live in this world where it isn't, if he has a chance of winning this game, then this makes more sense to contest any other play. So tougher plus 8 damage is enough.
That's going to be it.
So
Firebat is out of the tournament. He knew that he was not in a good spot going into this because of how aggressive Kranich's lineup was and the fact he could ban away the Warlock. He gave it such a good shot, but in the end, Kranich's strategy just came out on tops because he didn't bring that control Warlock, which Firebat was so awesome.